So today, you guys get to hear from me because Bob isn't here. I don't know if that's really scary or if it's not scary. I hope that it's not scary for you because I think that I've got a pretty good message that you guys are going to like. Something that the Lord has put on my heart for a little while. And so I need you guys to turn in your Bible to Genesis 32. Wow, I already messed up. 32 verses 22. If you don't know, Genesis is like first couple pages of the book. And so the title of today's sermon is Fight or Flight. We're going to kind of talk about what it means to really fight with God and what it means to flight from God. And so while you guys are at Genesis 32, I'm going to read from Matthew 22:32. So just a little background on this. The Pharisees and the Sadducees are coming at Jesus, and they're trying to trick him into saying something that's heresy, where they can, say, "Hey, we got this guy finally. We can finally put him down for something." And so in Matthew 22:32, he says, "I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, and he is not the God of the dead, but is the God of the living." And so those are three pretty big names that he just dropped. Abraham. Abraham's one of the biggest people in the Old Testament. Isaac, another great name. And Jacob, another great name. When you look at Jacob, you think of many things. You think of all the blessings that he's had. You think of how his lineage is from Jesus, how he has many sons, he's wealthy, he's got many wives, he's got it all going for him. Jacob is kind of what everybody aspired to be, because he was kind of on a pedestal outside of everybody else. He was at the top class, and everybody was kind of here. But then, if you actually look deeper into Jacob's life, you'll see more than just being wealthy, more than just having many sons. You'll see a lot of other cool things. Wait a second. That's not very cool. Jacob was a coward. Jacob was a deceiver. And Jacob was fearful. That's three really weird things to bring up and say that you're talking about how you're the God of Jacob when you're the God of a guy who's a coward, a deceiver, and fearful. I would think that you'd want to say something more, I've got this guy to look at who's on the pedestal. He's done all the right things, but he says Jacob as well. And Jacob's done all these wrong things. Let's just look at a little background on Jacob. So Jacob's name in Hebrew sounds like heel, and heel means deceiver. And so Jacob was literally called the deceiver. And so imagine being born and your parents are like, "Yeah, this guy's pretty cool, but we're just going to call him deceiver, and that's what he's going to be for the rest of his life." That doesn't really sit well with me. But Jacob lived right up to his name. He stole his brother's birthright. He stole his brother's blessing. And on top of that, he couldn't even take responsibility for what he did. He tried to run from it all. He got the birthright, he got the blessing, and then he hid from Esau because he knew Esau was bigger and stronger. He knew that Esau, if he got a hold of him, was going to try and kill him. And so Jacob does what most people would do and ran. So Jacob lives his life captivated by fear. Because he's like, when is Esau? Is Esau going to be around this next corner that I'm going around? Is he going to be right here to get me? Am I going to be okay to really just kind of do whatever I want for the rest of my life? And so, if you guys are at verse 24 is what we'll go from. So Genesis 32, verse 24. Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he could not defeat him, he struck Jacob's hip socket as they wrestled and dislocated his hip. And then he said to Jacob, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." "What is your name?" the man asked. "Jacob," he replied. "Your name will no longer be Jacob." He said, "It will be Israel, because you have struggled with God and with men, and you have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he answered, "Why do you ask my name?" And he blessed him there. Jacob then named the place Peniel, "For I have seen God face to face," and he said, "Yet my life has been spared." The sun shone on him as he passed by Peniel, limping because of his hip. So looking at Jacob now, we saw what the past is. We saw all the trials and errors that he's had, running from his brother, stealing his brother's stuff, running from every problem that he has. Jacob was really good with his tongue. He could get his way out of most situations just by talking. He was not, I'm going to get out of it just because of the power and all the things that I have. I'm going to talk my way out of it and just kind of weasel my way around so that way my hands don't have to be dirty. They don't have to get dirty. We'll trick them. It'll be fine. Everybody will be okay in the end. But Jacob's acquired wealth. Jacob's very wealthy. He's got lots of animals, lots of things. He's got 4 wives. He's got many sons. But Jacob's about to cross paths with Esau. And it's inevitable. There's no going around it. There's no, kind of going around where Esau was. He's got to cut through right where Esau is. So before this passage, Jacob sends a message to his brother Esau. And he says, hey, I'm going to pass by where you're at. Please don't make this weird. Just let us get through. We'll be all hunky-dory. We'll be all cool. Just go with the flow, man. And so he sends his messenger. His messenger comes back and is like, hey, man, your brother was so cool with it. He got 400 guys with swords and all this stuff. Well, they're going to come meet you. It's going to be great. But Jacob is like, 400 swords, that's not a welcome party. They're coming to kill me. So Jacob immediately is in this flight mode. He didn't think about fighting. He just went, okay, what's all the things that I can do to get around this? I could do this, I could do this, I could do this. And so Jacob, he decides, I'm going to take my family, put them across the river, along with all my stuff, because then if Esau gets to that, he'll take that stuff and he'll go, and we'll be cool, because I'll be like 6 miles away. We'll be all good. And so Jacob's like, I couldn't care less about all the stuff I got, as long as I'm good. So he sends all his stuff across the river. Jacob goes back across the river. And, when we think of river, we kind of think of these little rivers. This was, the Jabbok River was a valley. It led one river straight through. You had a mile-long incline on one side, a mile-long incline on the other side. So it wasn't like just kind of going across the river a couple yards. No, he had to go down the valley, up the valley, out a little ways, and then came back. So, really, if Esau was going to come attack Jacob, he could see it off in the distance. He's skirting out of there. He's done. He ain't sticking around for all that party. And so Jacob's opportunity is just flight. That's all he sees. He sees, I'm going to get out of this any way possible without having to worry about all my stuff. I have no responsibility to that stuff. Yeah, that stuff's mine and all, but, I don't really have to do anything with that because it's kind of my stuff, but it's not really. Not my problem, so it'll be okay. And so Jacob goes back across the river. He's back at the camp where he was. And so it's just him. So Jacob is alone. He's by himself. He sent everything else across the river already. So it's not like he's got somebody to keep him company, somebody to comfort him or anything. No, he sent everything over. It's just him. So Jacob's alone. Jacob is also cornered. You've got valley on one hand with a river, and then you've got wilderness with nothing in front of him. So really, Jacob's got nowhere to turn. So being alone and being cornered, Jacob is overwhelmed by fear. Jacob's terrified. He's always looking over his shoulder. He doesn't know what the next moment's going to bring. He keeps thinking, Esau's here, he's going to get me. He's letting that fear get a hold of who he is. He's being defined by deceiver. He's being defined by his fear because that's all he sees. He can't see any of the good. He can't see anything else but fear. And so verse 24 comes where Jacob is approached by a man. Jacob hadn't saw this man before. And for the first time in Jacob's life, Jacob fights. It's kind of weird considering he's been a flyer the rest of his life. But Jacob fights. Jacob sees the man and he wrestles with the man, not even knowing who he was. And every time that I read this, I can't help but think, if I was Jacob, what would have my thought been? I'm alone, by myself, cornered. and this guy's approaching me. My first thought is, that's Esau. It's on. We're about to throw hands. We're about to do whatever we got to do. And that's what Jacob thought. And I can't help but think the same way that Jacob did. When it comes to the fight or flight, that was the first time that he fought. And so it was probably pretty weird for Jacob. Jacob has never fought. Jacob's always flew away. That sounds right. He's always flew away. But Jacob fights. And reading that, it's weird to me. Because Jacob's fighting. I don't know. It's just, every time that I read that part of the scripture, it always captivates me. And so Jacob's wrestling with this man all night long. He's not giving in. The other man's not giving in. They're wrestling at it. They're going at it. They're trying to see who's going to come out on top. And the man looking at Jacob and fighting with him is realizing this guy's not giving up. He's holding on for dear life. He's trying to survive. And so he's like, okay, I need a little bit of an upper hand. And we find out that this man that Jacob is wrestling with is God. He touches Jacob's hip. Just touches. Doesn't say that he wrenched it out. It doesn't say that he pulled it out. He just touched his hip, and his hip came out of socket. Now, I don't know how many wrestlers there are in the world that can just, touch a guy's hip and it's like gone out of the socket. Because I feel like that's a pretty good upper hand to have if you are a wrestler. But that's what the man did to Jacob. And so Jacob is now wrestling with this man, hip out of socket, still not giving up. He's not giving in. This is completely uncharacteristic of Jacob. Jacob's flew. Jacob has always ran from everything, but he's sticking in it, sticking with it. He's getting his hands dirty. Something that I've said so many times reading through the life of Jacob. Get your hands dirty. Be a man. Put on the gloves. Do what you got to do. But he never did. And this is the first time. And so reading through this one, I can't help but kind of root for Jacob in a sense. Because I want him to finally man up, really own up to what he needs to do. And so Jacob's still wrestling with this man. Won't give up. Because Jacob knows if he loses, he's going to be found out for what he is. See, Jacob lived his life with a mask on. The entire time that Jacob was accruing all this wealth and all this stuff, he had that mask on. I've got it put together. I'm a good person. I know what I'm doing. But inside of Jacob's head, he knew exactly who he was. He was a deceiver. He was a trickster. He was somebody that he never had a sense of security. He was always fearful. Because he got too captivated in his label of deceiver. His parents said, "You're a deceiver." And so he just said, "Sure, I guess I'll be a deceiver." It's like I watched a movie called Zootopia. One of my favorite movies. I don't know why. It's just great. And the whole time, one of the guys' his name is Nick. He's a fox. He's a pretty cool guy, in my opinion. But every time they said, he's a fox. He's a shifty fox. He knows what he is. So Nick kind of let that be who he was. Nick was like, everybody thinks of me as a fox. Why would I be anything different? And that's how Jacob was. I'm a deceiver. Why would I be anything different? It doesn't matter if I do something good. Everybody's going to be like, "Oh, thanks, Jacob. Deceiver. Appreciate it, man. Oh, you helped me change something? Thanks, deceiver. Thanks, deceiver. Thanks, deceiver." So no matter what he did, he's constantly reminded that he's a deceiver. And so that mask where Jacob, he had it on, he knows that if he loses this wrestling match, that mask is coming off and everybody's about to see him for the deceiver that he actually is. He tried to take that part of him, stuff it so far deep down inside that nobody would ever find it. And it's all about to unfold. I think of Jacob as a house of cards. He's built all these things up, his wealth, his money, his all around just his ability to get his way out of things. But a house of cards always falls when it gets hard. And that's who Jacob was. Jacob listened to that lie. There wasn't anything else that Jacob could think of other than deceiver. But then we hit verse 28. Your name will no longer be Jacob. So that name tag that Jacob had been wearing, take that sucker off. Your new name is Israel. And Israel means wrestled with God. So Jacob is getting a new name, and it's way more significant than just changing your name from, like, if I changed my name from Jordan to, like, He-Man, that'd be really cool. But I don't think it'd go over too well. It's way more different than that. Getting a new name is completely changing who Jacob is. Jacob will no longer be known as the deceiver. Jacob will no longer be known as a trickster. Jacob's going to be known as the man who wrestled with God. Because how many people can you think of before Jacob that have actually physically wrestled with God? I can't think of one. Physically wrestling with God. So God's like, you know what? You're not going to be defined by what the world sees you as. You're going to be defined by how I see you. I see you as somebody who's willing to wrestle with me. I see you as somebody who's willing to do what must be done. Get their hands dirty. Get into the thick of it. And so Jacob gets this new name of Israel. And he says, it will be Israel because you have struggled with God and with men, and you have prevailed. He's prevailed over his deceit. He's prevailed over his fear. And so then Jacob, he wants to know the man's name. He wants to know, who have I just wrestled with this entire time? Who is it that I am laying my life down to try and beat? But the man tells Jacob, I'm not going to give you my name. Why is it important that you get my name? And I think that's where it hit Jacob. This is God. He renames that place where he was at Peniel. I mean, for somebody to rename a place, it has to be super significant. Jacob has renamed a few places in his life. He's been to Bethel. He's renamed Bethel. Bethel was a place of healing. In Peniel now. Peniel is the place where he gets to wrestle with God. So every time that somebody's going to come through Peniel, they're going to think about the time that Jacob has wrestled with God. They're going to think about the time that God was here in the thick of it with humanity. And so Jacob is still in Peniel, and we saw that that name change was more than just a name change. It was the death of Jacob. Not in the literal sense. It is the death of all the things that Jacob had been. We see the birth of Israel. We get to see a new person moving forward. We get to see a new time in the life of Israel. Jacob is still himself in the physical form, but he's now Israel. He's now somebody who's wrestled with God, willing to put it all out there to fight, because he knows that after that time with God, he's changed. And so Jacob is walking through Peniel, trying to catch up to his encampment across the river, bruised and battered. His hip's out of socket. You know, I don't know how many of you guys have had a hip out of socket. I haven't, but I've talked to a couple people who have, and they said it's really hard to move. They said, like, that whole side of your body, it's just really hard to move your leg. And so thinking of Jacob having to walk down the valley, cross through the river, back up the valley alone, he was completely changed. Because all that stuff that Jacob had, he could have had one of his servants, give him a piggyback ride or something like that. Get the cart, help me get through, because my hip is just killing me. But Jacob pulls up his big boy pants and crosses through the river to meet up with his encampment. And so out of that entire thing, I want you to think about this part. You cannot have a godly encounter and leave the same person that you were. It's not going to happen. When you meet God and God is evident with you, something's going to change. You're not going to be the same as you were. Because you can't look at the face of divinity and then just be like, that was cool. Can I get back to what I was doing, please? Cool? No. You're going to see the face of divinity. You're going to have the fear of God inside of you, and it's going to change who you are. And so, seeing as this was my first sermon with you guys, I figured I would let you guys in on my life so that way you guys get to know who I am. And so, I grew up in Ohio, about 4 hours from here, just above Columbus. My dad was pastor. He's been at the church for about 25 years. And so, the church was my second home. We're there 4, if not more days of the week than that. And so the church for me, I always grew up. I knew the right things. I knew the wrong things. I knew what all the stuff meant. I could give you every answer that made me seem like a good person, made me seem like the right Christian kind of thing. And we went to many camps, and we went to a camp called Mahaffey. Elena knows what that camp was because she went with us. And so did Trent. And so we went to Mahaffey, and I remember accepting the Lord, and then the very next day, we were sitting outside, and we were singing a song, and I could feel this nudge, like, I couldn't tell you if it was a physical nudge, a spiritual nudge. I just felt something that was completely different, and it was God saying, hey, I'm about to use you for my plan. And so I got my call, and I knew, like, hey, I can't run from this, so let me go full force at it. And so I started really diving into what it's going to mean for my future. And so I started going, I went through middle school. I was the kid in middle school and high school where, like, they knew I was a preacher's kid. So it was like, hey, don't do anything bad around the preacher's kid. And I'm like, guys, I just want to go to school. Like, just let me be. We'll be okay. I hope that the way that I live my life will make you want to change, but don't change who you are just because of me. Change who you are because of who God is. And so we're going through school, and I started college about 2 years early, going through everything, and 2019 was the hardest year of my life. So in 5th grade, my best friend had been diagnosed with a brain tumor. And so this was my best friend that I'm over at his house all the time. His parents claim me as like a third son. I'm pretty sure they claim me on their taxes as a dependent. And so I was over at his house all the time. Me and him were thick as thieves. And when he got told about that brain tumor, I was like, hey, that's not going to change. We're going to grow up. We're going to be cool together. We know exactly what our future is going to be like. We're not going to let this stop us. 2019 comes around. I'm sitting in our youth room at church. We just got done with Sunday school. And I'm getting ready to go downstairs and play on our worship team. And I get a text. I get a text that says that he's passed away. It took me by storm because the weeks before it'd been said, the doctors told him, hey, your cancer's gone. And so, we had a party. We were going all out. Cancer's gone. All this stuff's gone. And then I get the text that he's passed away. And I wish that I could say right away that I was pretty hurt and heartbroken. But for about the first 20 minutes, it kind of was all just there. Like everything froze. Time stood still kind of to me. And so for the next hour, I'm sitting up in our youth room just kind of not aware of anything. And so then about 20 minutes into it, I start bawling my eyes out. I looked off. It was great. Wonderful time. Tears were flowing. If you would have saw me, you'd have been like, wow. I would have laughed at myself too. But I was hurt. I didn't know what this meant. This was a first for me. And so I kind of was sitting there, and people came up, and they were trying to console me and everything. But then I remembered that famous quote, be a man. That's one of the things that I hear a lot. Be a man. Do what it means to be a man. Take those feelings that you got, shove them so far down that you're never going to see them again. So that's what I did. I took it all. I shoved it so far down that nobody would ever see it. I put on my mask of, here I am, I'm a confident, strong person. I know what I'm going to do. I know exactly how I'm going to get through life. I'm ready to face the day, but in here, I was broken. I knew exactly what was in here. People out there, they didn't know, but I did. And so every time I thought of that hurt, that anger. Every time I thought of it, I just took it and I just kept stuffing it down. Because I don't want to bring that up. We don't need to talk about that, because that's not important. I just need to keep going on with my life. I need to get my degree. I need to get out into ministry. And so in 2019, he passes away in February. We get to June, and we're going to see my aunt who's in the hospital. She is dying of cancer. Like, we are going to the room to say final goodbyes and everything. We get in there, she passes away, and while we're in there, we get a call, like, hey, come down to room 1, it was like 133 or something like that. And we're like, that's kind of weird that you get a call to go down to another room in a hospital when the person you're here to see is right here. So we go down, walk in the room, and there's my grandpa. He's like, hey! We're all kind of laughing because we're like, what are you doing here? He goes, oh, I just had a massive heart attack, but we're okay now. I'm like, hold up a second. You had a massive heart attack, but you're sitting here laughing and joking around with us. He's like, yeah, it's all good. And so we get through that day, we get through the funeral and everything, and then I want to say it was about a month later, we're getting ready to go to Beulah Beach, which is another family camp out by Lake Erie. It's close to Cleveland. We get a call, hey, your grandpa had a massive heart attack. He's passed away. So we've got to change all of our plans. Instead of going to Beulah Beach to go there, we are going to go to Pittsburgh for the funeral and everything, and then go to Beulah Beach. And so I remember going to the funeral, and I remember being in the room, but not really being in the room. I took all those feelings that I had from my grandpa, and I left them at the door because I kept hearing, be a man, be a man, be a man, do the hard thing. Take those feelings, leave them at the door. You got to be strong for everybody in that room because they're looking at you, and when they look at you, they need to see you as strong because maybe it will make them feel a little better. And so I took that, and I was like, that makes sense. I'm going to be that man. I'm going to take those feelings that I had, I'm going to leave them at the door. I'm going to let everything else just be there. I remember being in that room. Everybody's crying around me. And I stood there wanting to cry, wanting to be sorrowful. But I did everything to keep myself from not doing that, to keep myself from seeing what was going on in here. What was the broken part of me? What was that part that I don't want anybody else to see? Those feelings that I keep stuffing down, I don't want anybody else to see them. And so we get done with that day. I go back to college that next semester, and like for the first month, I'm going to college. I'm learning how to be a preacher and everything, and I hope I did okay with it. But that entire time, I was going with this kind of sense of, yeah, the stuff I'm learning, I couldn't care less about that. Because I don't see it. How could a God that I'm serving, actively trying to please, make my life horrible? He's making it harder for me to follow him. Why would I want to do that? Why would I want to dive deeper into somebody who's actively trying to hurt me? And so on my way home, there's usually, it's a lot like Boot Jack. That's about the only road I know here. So when I think of Boot Jack, I think it goes to everywhere. And so for me, back home, my house, there was our Boot Jack. That's how I got to school. I'd follow that the whole way. And so usually that's the way I'd go. But this time on my way home, I decided, you know what, I'm going to take a trail off. And so I pulled off, and I'm going down the back way, which adds about another 30 minutes. But I pulled off into there's a gravel lot there. And so I pulled off, and I was sitting there, and that's when I had my fight with God. I had my all-out yelling match. God, why? 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 Why is this all happening to me? Why is my life so hard when I'm trying to glorify you? And it lasted for about 2 hours. And I got done with that, and it was like an overwhelming peace came over me. Because I heard him say, I'm with you. 3 simple words, I'm with you. That entire time, I'm thinking to myself, God's not here. Where is God in the midst of all of this heartbreak and this anger? Where is he at? He's not here. He's off at somebody else's place. He's not with me. But that entire time, he was standing right next to me, waiting for me to come have the hard time with him, waiting for me to turn back to him. And so after that conversation, I realized that I'm Jacob. I'm Jacob. I'm the fraud. I'm broken. I'm that person that I don't want anybody else to see. I'm the person that when everybody thinks of, I want them to see this, but I'm still me. And that's when it hit. God is still the God of me. God wasn't just the God of Jacob in the good times. God said, I am the God of Jacob. In the bad times, in the worst times, in the good times, I'm still the God of Jacob. I'm still the God of Jordan. And God is still the God of you. He doesn't see you for your good times. He doesn't see you for all the times where he's like, yeah, you're doing great. Way to go. Keep it up. No, he sees you when you're at your lowest point. He sees you in that darkness where you don't want anybody else to see that side of you. And believe me, God is big enough for that wrestling match. It's not like heavyweight class and then anything below that. No, God is ready for that wrestling match. He's ready to have the hard time with you. He's ready to move through you. Because, one, God doesn't need you. There's not one time that God's like, yeah, I need Jordan. I need him to do all this stuff for me. If I'm not here, God's still going to do something, just with a different person. It doesn't matter that I'm standing here. It doesn't matter that I'm doing all this stuff for him, because he doesn't need me. But God wants you. God wants you. He wants you in that dark side of you where you don't want anybody else to see. The part of you that you hope and pray it doesn't get out. He still wants you. He wants to take you in your good and he wants to take you in your bad, because he knows that when you have the hard time with him, you're going to leave changed. You're going to be a bit different person. He's going to give you that new name. You may see yourself as many things. You may see yourself as deceiver, fearful, anxious, all these things that the world is giving you labels for. But God doesn't see a single one of those. He sees those labels that the world gives you, and he goes, get those out of here. Those aren't what I say you are. I say you are loved. You are redeemed. You are made new. You are whole with me. When you have that wrestling match, you're completely changed. It's not something that you're going to have that wrestling match, and you're going to be like, yeah, I'm new, but I'm still fearful. I'm new, but I'm always anxious. You're going to be new, and you're going to be made new, and you're not going to have any of those old labels. Because those old labels, that's a thing of the past. When God gave Jacob that new name, that's all in the past. He's no longer that deceiver. He's completely made new. He's Israel. And so when God takes those labels from you and throws them out, you're going to know. You're not going to live your life like you were. That grief, that sorrow, that anger, all those problems, when you have that wrestling match and you get into the thick of it with God, they're all going to be gone. You see, for mine and Jacob's life, we spent too much time running. I ran from my anger. I ran from my sorrow. I ran from my grief because I didn't want anybody else to see it. Jacob ran from his deceit. He ran from his anger. He ran from his fear because he didn't want anybody else to see it. But then when you have that fight and you finally approach it, and you let God do the work that he's been trying to do that entire time, all that stuff in the past is the past. It's gone. It means nothing. And so, talking about fight or flight, I just want to know, are you willing to do the hard thing? Are you willing to finally say, enough's enough, I'm not going to run again? I'm going to turn back, and I'm going to fight. I'm going to do what God's been asking me to do this entire time. And so, is today the day? Is today the day that you do that, where you say, I'm ready to fight. I'm ready to have it out with you, God, because I know that where I fight with you, there's going to be healing. There's going to be growth. There's going to be renewal. And so please, if you get one thing out of this today, God doesn't need you, but God wants you. That's the whole reason that he's here for us. He wants you. He wants you to turn back. He's ready for that fight. He's ready to make you new. Don't ever forget that.